And welcome to part 3 of this podcast with Albert Hammond, who's written songs that you will definitely know. Now, when Albert went to America, he achieved success with the album It Never Rains in Southern California. Now, on that album was a track called Down by the River, which was about ecology, very early track about the environment. And that album opened up a whole new world for Albert Hammond.
I found that when I finally got to audition for Clive Davis and 30 other people, from publishers to producers, and I got the go ahead to make my first record as a solo artist, and I went in the studio with the Wrecking Crew.
Yeah, which were these group of musicians who were basically
And
on
played
about
for everyone.
400 hits, weren't they? They were on masses
They
of
played
hits.
for everyone from the Beach Boys to Neil Diamond to just everyone and anyone. And they were so good, and they helped you, and because you came from from overseas, they were even more you know being kind and loving to you, and trying to understand you, and then they would say, what do you think if I add this thing here, and I would say, sounds great to me.
I mean, it must have been interesting with Americans when you say you're from Gibraltar, because I can't imagine.
Yes.
You know,
Oh, I did a Johnny Carson show.
I've seen that. It's
Have you
fantastic.
seen that? Yeah, it was
Yes.
so funny, because I was totally naive about all this stuff. I mean, I was just there telling the truth, telling, when the border closed, what happened, and how we drove around in circles and all that kind of stuff. And and it's hilarious. I mean, I can't believe that, that
So,
happened.
so the first record that you released in the States was that Never Rains in Southern California.
Yeah,
And
that's
that,
that's
which
that's
was, this was the album that really garnered you
yeah,
attention, wasn't it? And this
yeah.
was something that made an impact. And there's a track on the album. And if I think of Marvin Gaye and his album What's Going On, which was an ecological
My
album, which was before.
favorite album,
uh,
Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On."
and
I
is that
play
what
it still all
inspired
the
you to
what
write Down
to
by the
write down
River?
by the river. No,
Oh,
no. What
wow.
inspired me to write Down by the River, Mike and I, because we were partners and we wrote together, was the fact that every time we looked up at the Hollywood Hills, we couldn't see the Hollywood sign, and we'd say, "What is this yellow, orangey smoke that?" And so we'd ask people, and they would say, "Oh, that's pollution," and we couldn't figure out what pollution was, because we never heard, at least I hadn't. In Gibraltar, I never heard pollution. Then Gibraltar is it's a peninsula, so the wind blows and you get no pollution there. So that was the reason we wrote Down by the River, was the fact that we found out about smog and pollution, and we started to get more into it and realized that that the rivers were being poisoned, and the oceans was being poisoned, and the land was being poisoned, and we were being poisoned. And I think it was probably one of the first green songs, ecological songs written.
Yeah, and it's interesting because obviously, I mean, to reference your recent album, The Body of Work, which is, about your whole body of work, did you think back then that a song could save the world?
I've always thought that music is a healer. And I've always thought that music heals human beings. And so if music heals human beings, then music can save the world. The song, you think you're going to save the world. I mean, I call it Save the World. But you think you're going to save the world is the fact that, it doesn't seem like we can, but not because of every one of us, but because of the lunacy of that's going on with grown-up people and their corruption and their egos and their I don't understand it. I don't understand, people that are grown up, that have children, that can think the way they think. So I try and express myself in the best way I can in everything that happens in life. And part of body of work came from that. I mean, I got divorced in 2016 after 40 years, and not because I wanted to. I thought it would be, that at my age, I wouldn't want to do that, and then the pandemic came, and then the vaccines, and we needed to have them because not only would it save your life, but you couldn't travel if you didn't. I wouldn't have taken them if I could have traveled, but you couldn't. So I had to travel. So I took them, and then after that, I got an autoimmune disease that I'm still dealing with. And I know a few other musicians that have autoimmune diseases after the vaccines, and we just have to deal with it. So all this was a heavy weight on my shoulders.
I mean, to talk about body of work, was that a point then, going through this divorce and having these things happen to you, and also the external thing of COVID coming in and then, having an impact on you because of the vaccine, then was the studio a safe place for you to retreat and regroup? Is that what it is for you?
Yes. I mean, I actually say sometimes, Buddhists go to the mountains. I went to the studio. Yeah. I mean, I could have gone with a Buddhist. The problem, look what happened to someone who went with a Buddhist and he came back and they'd stolen his money. Leonard Cohen.
Yeah. So this going back to this first album, because it had some immense tracks on it. Down by the river, It Never Rains in Southern California.
Yeah, but think about Listen to the World.
Yeah.
I mean, look at those words.
Yeah.
We wrote it in 1970. But I mean, those words, you could relate today to those words.
So this first album, because it was a success, and in a certain way it launched you in America, and you mentioned going on Johnny Carson, so it obviously did launch you quite dramatically in America. Was it also a launching pad there? Were you writing with Mike, collaborating with Mike? Was it a launching pad for you to start really writing for other artists?
I think the other artists came because of that album.
So Albert now is, of course, on the verge of writing some of the most memorable songs in pop history. So listen to part 4 and find out how The Air That I Breathe became a hit for the Hollies, To All the Girls I've Loved Before for Julio Iglesias and Willie Nelson, and why When You Tell Me That You Love Me worked for Diana Ross.